the COVID pandemic has had a devastating impact on the health and social fabric of society. It has had an enormous impact on the economies too. But in Africa, the impact could be more long-lasting and devastating. COVID is affecting our lives. Is affecting the economies. And there's a number of reasons, I think, why in Africa, the impact might be more devastating. One has to do with health infrastructure. It is the least developed in the world. At the same time, African economies are predominantly agriculture-based, where populations engaged in agricultural activities live hand to mouth, with limited access to sustainable income. Revenue mobilization has been a significant issue in the past. It is now even more significant given the need for resources to create fiscal space for instance, health expenditure, but also supporting the economies and supporting the households to mitigate the impact and the social consequences of the pandemic. So we have invited the distinguished guests today, as I said, for them to share their views with us and experiences with us. Amongst them, they have significant policy experience, and I've asked them to talk to us about how they see, for instance, the future in Africa, past the pandemic, how well governments have responded to the challenge they face, what mitigation measures do they have they put in place, how challenging revenue mobilization has been, what is the impact of COVID on poverty, inequality, social protection, businesses, informality, financial flows, taxation, cross-border trade. There are so many aspects that deserve discussion and attention. There's another thing, of course, about the international community. What should the international community be doing? And at the same time, of course, there's always the question about what governments should be doing in terms of policy. Can they support small businesses? And this is something that we're going to be touching later on in the discussion. But before I hand over to the panelists, let me introduce them to you. And I'm going to start my introduction in the same sequence that I've been asking them to make their presentation and share their views. So I'm going to start with Mr. Maimbo Nyanga. Good evening, Mr. Nyanga, and thank you for joining us. Maimbo is a senior economist in the TADAT Secretariat. This is the Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department. Before joining the fund, Maimbo worked for the Zambian Revenue Authority, where he was the director for the research and planning. Before that, he was executive assistant to the Commissioner General. Maimbo has extensive experience in policy making. He has participated in several tax policy review processes and preparation of the national budget over the years. He has also worked in the budget office on tax and expenditure policies, and later in the Directorate of Macroeconomic Policy Analysis in the Ministry of Finance in Zambia. Thank you for joining us. Good to have you. We also have Denis Mukama, Mr. Denis Mukama. He's coming from Rwanda. Mr. Mukama is working for the Rwanda Revenue Authority and is the acting deputy commissioner for the Planning and Research Department. Denis is part of the team responsible for developing Rwanda's medium-term strategy, a strategy that will provide a comprehensive journey for increasing tax revenues over the medium term, the next 3 years. Denis is also one of the TADAT trained individuals in the revenue agency, and the coordinator of TADAT activities aimed at implementing corrective measures to close the tax administrative gaps following the assessment. In his current post, I have to say that Denis has been instrumental in ensuring that the tax administration embraces research, and I attest to that, given that the center is cooperating with the Revenue Authority. Welcome, Denis. Thank you for joining us. Then is Dr. Mundia Kabinga, who is a development economist with extensive experience in applied economic analysis. Mundia currently works as a senior lecturer in finance and strategy at the University of Cape Town. He worked as an advisor to the Zambian Ministry of Finance. He has consulted for the World Bank, the United Nations Development Programme, Organization, the OECD, among others. His most recent work focuses on evaluating the impacts of COVID-19 and its policy responses on poverty, inequality, social protection, informality, among others. Dr. Kabinga, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Very, very nice to have you. Then we have Dr. Ezera Madzivanyika, who is the research manager at the African Tax Administration Forum. Prior to joining ATAF, he worked for the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority for 20 years in various roles, from domestic taxes to customs, to risk management, among others. Ezera has been a lead economist in the drafting of the 2018 African Tax Outlook publication, and in 2019 was the lead drafter of the ATAF VAT guidebook for the construction industry. He holds a PhD in economics. Very nice to have you. Welcome. To the roundtable. Last but not least, my colleague, Professor Julian Jamison. Julian is professor of economics at the University of Exeter Business School. He has been faculty at Northwestern University, visited a number of other places, top places in the US, worked for the US government for a number of years and the World Bank, and joined Exeter University in 2019. Julian's research focuses on the interaction between individual preferences, decisions, and well-being on the one hand, and institutional policies on the other, with a special interest in explicit welfare trade-offs. Much of Julian's work has taken place in many developing countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, with a particular sectoral focus on health and financial behavior. He has consulted for the US National Institute of Mental Health, NASA, the US Army, Bates White, Lockheed Martin, and GiveWell. Julian, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us. So that's the introduction. Now I would like to ask our guests to within 5 to 7 minutes, to share their views, how they see things, panning out, what the responses have been, what the difficulties, what the future looks like in terms of public policy, responses, revenue mobilization, so many things we can talk about.
Thank you very much. In the IMF, the issues of how tax administrations would respond to risks or whatever calamity is a subject that has evolved, and it's occupied our minds for a long time. And so because some of our member countries, if you remember, have also faced some kind of challenges. We had the Ebola in West Africa, so they had some lockdown, but not as extensive as the ones we've had, the one we have recently, this great lockdown. So there are certain things we knew about our capability to respond in case we are hit with a calamity. So one of the things we clearly knew from the diagnostic and other technical assistance mission we've provided to our member countries is that most of the tax administrations do not have data and management information on many of their functional areas. So that is already a challenge on its own. Then secondly, they had huge challenges in terms of measuring their performance. So there's basically weak performance measurement capability. So they didn't really know how they would perform in case they had challenges. And then one thing which was coming out clearly is that the tax administrations had great weaknesses in both compliance and institutional risk management. So in terms of how they would respond to risk pertaining to the taxes and also the risk pertaining to the people and to the institutions, or basically the operations. So there was a big challenge in terms of knowing whether they would adequately respond in terms of the challenges. I wanted to share a slide of some of the results we have in terms of what capabilities the institutions had. It looks like I'm unable to share.
So yeah, we need to make you just a sec. We need to make you a co-host. Can we make Maimbo co-host?
So while I'm waiting to be made the co-host, one of the things we have done in TADAT, we do carry out these diagnostic assessments. So we knew how each of our member countries would respond. So we had diagnostic assessments in 42 countries. So this is the slide. The slide I'm showing. So the way we measured the performance of the tax administration, the highest scores an A. This is basically those countries that have good practice. Then we have the B, those who are their activities are kind of sound. Then C, we have basics in place, and then D is of great concern. So one of the things we noted is that in terms of countries being able to, tax administrations being able to identify the risks that pertain to the taxes, about 25% of the countries did not have anything in place. Then in terms of once those who identify the risk and then they try to put measures in place, those who were able to assess and prioritize were 51% did not have anything in place. Then in terms of having mitigation activities, what do you do in case a calamity strikes? We have 53% did not have anything in place. Then in terms of monitoring whatever activities they had put in place, about 60% did not have anything in place. Then in terms of monitoring the operational risk that pertain to continuity of the business, 62% did not have anything, did not have this capability. Then those who had the capability, 71.4% did not have, never tested those systems, they never monitored them. Then in terms of issues of how to manage issues pertaining to human capital, 71% did not have anything in place. So issues of, this is where issues like how to prepare for social distancing, how to prepare the staff to work offsite, 71% did not have anything in place. Then in terms of evaluating the operational risks, about 100% did not do anything. So the biggest challenge is that, yes, the countries and ourselves as technical assistant providers, we knew that there could be challenges, but we were not prepared for them. So in terms of when the crisis struck, what is it that some of the countries did? So in essence, I think what we've seen in terms of what our member countries did, I can group these in terms of 6 main categories. So what some countries did was to ease the compliance for taxpayers and easing both in terms of taxes and customs. So some of the things they did were to extend filing deadlines, relaxing the conditions for payment. So they had taxpayers would be allowed to pay in installments, suspension of extension of deadlines for say filing disputes. Then on the custom side, there was more emphasis, for example, on pre-arrival clearance, fast track clearance and so on of COVID essential products. Then the second thing which they did was to enhance taxpayer and trader services communication. So there was a lot of great push in terms of offering incentives for SMEs, COVID-related products in those countries that have social insurance contributions. Some of them were reduced or suspended. Then the third issue which they did was to implement government stimulus and policy products and so on. Then one of the key things most of the tax administrations did was to postpone enforcement programs. For example, there was reduced enforcement of debt collection. Audits were suspended and mostly they moved to desk audits. And then there was increase of inspection of specified products. Then focusing on business continuity, what did they do? So most of the tax administration put skeletal staff at workplaces and the work from home measures. So they became a priority. The issues of health and safety became very prominent. So some of them, those who had IT capabilities moved mostly to providing services online. And then the final thing which some of the countries did was to put in place revenue protection measures, given the increased need for government to provide more revenues. So they moved, for example, to increased risk-based criminal tax and smuggling investigations, tracking of stimulus reliefs for post-crisis. And also they started allowing some of having proactive engagement with the taxpayers in terms of revising their provisional taxes and also just helping the taxpayer comply in a timely manner and also enforcement of timely payment of withholding. So in conclusion, I think what we learned from the crisis is that the pandemic basically exposed or magnified those weaknesses which were existing. We knew, for example, Liberia had this lockdown during the Ebola, and the same with Sierra Leone. So it seems that we didn't take advantage of the lessons learned there. Then one of the key things which remains is that the availability of data still remains a very big challenge for many countries. Without the data, without information, really, it's difficult to make decisions. And one of the things we've seen among our member countries is that those that decided to take proactive measures, mitigation measures, preventive steps, in a much better step than those who hibernated. So I think for now, I would end here.
Thank you, Maimbo. Thank you. Over to you, Denis. You're muted. You're muted. You're muted. No, that's fine now.
Okay, good. Because I was trying to unmute, and they was telling me the host is not allowing me to unmute. So sorry. Thanks a lot. And again, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. Good morning. personally in Rwanda, I think it's 6:30, 6:14 p.m. So it's a good evening from our side. So yeah, I mean, I cannot re-emphasize more on what Maimbo has just communicated and has said, because, you know, this pandemic for us is, you know, it is one of those things that caused a dilemma into the tax and the tax administration in general. Because when you look at, you know, it caused a bit of a challenge. It caused a bit of a divergence pool between revenue maximization as a tax administration, of course, in conformity with the laws, and you know, and then the need to also facilitate the heavily affected businesses. So, because that's where you get the bulk of your tax. So there is that thin line. That where do you cross the line and where do you maintain? So that was a bit of a challenge. But again, I think I'll writing off from where Maimbo said, because my focus is mainly to try and look at, as a tax administration, what did we do as a Rwanda Revenue Authority? What did we put in place that you know, helps us in trying to cope with the situation and as well facilitate the taxpayers. So looking at the I think two aspects. When you're looking at how we try to facilitate businesses, you know, achieve business continuity, one and the first foremost thing that we did is it came at a time when we're just putting in place, or we had already a business continuity plan. In the event that a calamity like this hits, how do you survive? And this is also, it was re-emphasized during the two assessments we did of the TADAT, because you know, it came out prominently when you're looking at how do you survive, what do you have in place to keep you going as a tax administration in the event of a calamity. Now already for us, we had started taking that journey. So we had the basics to keep us running in terms of can we easily rotate our staff from working outside the office. We had already started on that journey. We had already started releasing like the IT staff to work a bit more in a more mobile manner. So it was building on that. So it was paramount that we had a business continuity plan, much as it was in its initial stages, but the pandemic really put pressure on us to implement it faster than we had planned. So in terms of having the business continuity plan, at least the basics to have us, you know, get going. So there are things that we did in terms of supporting. One, the staff, because I'm looking at it in three aspects. How do you support the staff to operate the way to continue providing their services? And then two, how do you support your taxpayers? Then three, how are you responding generally with the event or the request of general government provisions? As a tax administration, how are you supporting the recovery or the mitigations against COVID? So in terms of taxpayers, yes, Maimbo touched a bit of the audits. We really halted audits because one, you're trying to give a financial or less strain on the taxpayers. And also secondly, you're trying to reduce the interactions between the taxpayers and the auditors, and therefore room for spreading the virus. So we continued, of course, we maintained with the desk audits and all these issue-oriented audits for which we had information. So that's one of the measures that we put in place. And this started in March, because we went in a lockdown as a country from 21st March. So we were in lockdown for complete lockdown, for 5 weeks. So in terms of, again, hardships, you look at how are you facilitating your taxpayers in terms of those especially who have been hit by the pandemic. So enforcement was halted for a period of close to 2 months, where this in enforcement, I'm looking at garnishing taxpayers' assets. I'm looking at auctioning of taxpayer assets to recover taxes. And then, of course, that you facilitate it, or you help out with government intervention of trying to give more refunds, expediting their refund process. So, because that's one of the things that as developing countries or cash-strained economies, we try to struggle a lot with expediting taxpayer refunds. So, but in this period, we gave out in excess of over 9 billion or in a period of 6 months to try and expedite. This is something that was unheard of in Rwanda. So in terms of, again, facilitating taxpayers to comply with the taxing and the filing requirements and payment, there's always these requirements that we tell them, you guys who are big, we need you to satisfy your books so that, but then during that period, you do not have readily available the accountants to do the work. They are not going to the offices. So we extended the requirement. We removed the requirement for satisfying their financials for a period of almost 4 months. So they could file without certified financials, and then this way could do later as and when the economy started opening up. Of course, we've used a lot of facilitation in terms of extending the deadlines for meeting their tax obligations. That is filing and payment, but for all categories of taxpayers. The large benefited a shorter period as opposed to the small and medium taxpayers. For them, because the large benefited, I think, almost close to a month, whereas the small and medium went on for close to 2 months for income taxes. Again, now one of the things that the taxpayers again came back and said, this was something that we benefited a lot, is on their quarterly payments for income tax. Usually these are payments that you pay based on what you filed the previous year. If you're filing, if you made an income, if you declared so much in income tax, you expected every quarter the following month to pay an advance, a quarter of the amount that you had declared. But this time, because it was really, many people are struggling, many businesses were struggling. So there was a change where we required them to make those quarterly payments based on the current business performance. So if you're not performing, we don't expect you to pay. You'll file, but we don't expect an income from you. And if it depends based on how your business is progressing, then you can file the corresponding income tax for that particular quarter. I am not going to dwell a lot in penalties. Maimbo has touched all of them. We tried. There was a lot of easing on penalties and interests accruing from late payments. But then what I wanted to talk about is, again, in terms of staff, how did we facilitate staff? Again, this is things that we did, other revenue authorities have done, other countries have done. First, making sure that they're comfortable and they're able to work from their residence, their home areas, or their homes, or outside of the office. You give them access to the internet. There was a big budget for us to provide laptops because a number of them are working on desktops. There was all that facilitated so that the work does not seem to be halted. Of course, there's a lot of sanitizers. We bought a lot of gloves and masks for all especially those that are close in the line of duty, like customs officers and any of these people who by any means you have to interact with the taxpayers. So in terms of generally, what about our role as tax administration in enforcing or in helping the country overcome this pandemic? One, there's what we were requested to exempt some taxes like VAT on local production of masks so that we can have them in masses. And that was key in ensuring that not only the prices fall, but there's a bigger supply of masks in the country. We also expected to expedite clearances in customs of the essential goods. So these were given priorities, warehouses cleared so that all these essential goods come through. And again, also transit of goods. We always, I think Maimbo has been to Rwanda, we always have a local depot where all the goods cargo comes into Kigali. But this time we're forced to move some of the operations at the borders so that rather than having all these trucks and the drivers come to Kigali from abroad, from wherever they are coming, regional countries, So mitigating the risks, you make sure that the cargo is cleared, disinfected at the border post, and if it's transit, there's police to escort these vehicles all the way, and they have designated stopovers. So that all increases the budget of operations. I thought that's what I would want to say for now, but of course there are some things that we wanted to share with you in terms of what are the next steps going forward as a tax administration during this period that we are still facing the COVID, and then what are some of the effective, what have we seen that has been working from all these policy interventions. But let me stop for now due to time provisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis. Thank you. Mundia, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just set up. Okay. So just let me know when you're able to see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yes, no, thank you.
Okay, super. So thank you very much for the two presentations. I think most of my predecessors have spoken extensively to the issues within the tax administration. So I just wanted to take a slightly different lens on the tax crisis in Africa and how COVID has impacted Africa. So very broadly speaking, if we start as an entry point, looking at the current account deficits that have been faced by various African countries, and this is from the African Development Bank, we see a significant difference between oil exporters and other commodity exporters. And we basically are seeing that oil exporters seem to have pre-COVID relied extensively on their oil revenues to finance their investments, whereas other oil exporters basically tapped into the international capital markets and issued various sovereign debts to try and finance that particular development of infrastructure. Whereas other resource exporters, other than oil exporters, have had it really bad. The other category of countries that basically have had it even worse are the countries that basically are non-exporters of any particular commodities on the African continent. So as you can see, the gap between the gross savings and the gross investment is quite wide, and largely because they've borrowed extensively. And this basically puts a lot of additional pressure on the tax administrations to try and find the financing to not only service the debt, but also to supply basic services within the African context. And I guess another key distinction is just that the oil exporters have done relatively well. And so from that perspective, it might be much easier to raise revenue in an oil exporting country once the oil prices basically recover. And this is the approach that various international development finance institutions have taken. With regard to non-oil exporters, on the other hand, as well as other resource exporters, they have not been able to access that concessional financing, and hence the pressure to try and raise revenue is extremely high there. To such an extent that, as we've seen in recent developments in the news, we see Ghana basically has been able to successfully reschedule its debt, whereas Zambia has struggled extensively and is actively looking for means and ways domestically to try and raise the revenue that is required to service its debt. Not too long ago as well, there was also pre-COVID as well, there was a scenario around there was an increasing push towards resource transparency as a means of enhancing domestic revenues. And all this was basically targeted at helping and raise the revenue that's required to meet the sustainable development goals. So I think this was a dispute between the Tanzanian government and First Quantum Minerals, I think, and in which they were slammed with a $300 billion bill. But after various negotiations, the agreement was that a substantial stake would be passed on to government, and that's how government would raise its revenues, the required revenues to finance the SDGs through some dividend payment in addition to taxes. So that was basically a different configuration that basically emerged from the need for transparency in the mineral resource sector. So also related to that is the issue of growth. So before we can even talk about taxation, there needs to be some sort of growth. The economy needs to be growing, seem to be growing in order for you to basically be able to levy various taxes on it. And what we've seen consistently since 2010 or since 2016 is that growth has been relatively slow on the African continent relative to other emerging markets, as well as China itself. So this puts us in a very precarious position as tax administrators, as to whether or not we should, to what extent can we tax when, when there is very limited growth. Okay. Looking at a disaggregation of the growth itself, if we look deeply into the numbers from the African Development Bank, what we seem to be seeing is that the growth is relatively slow in Southern Africa, so there's some stagnation in some countries. And this is basically tied to oil resource producers versus non-oil resource, non-commodity producers, as well as other sectors. And what we see extensively from the data is that most of the growth is basically being fueled in countries like in North Africa, is fueled largely by oil revenues, whereas, and remittances, of course. So those perhaps basically provide two opportunities for revenues to be raised. So if you basically levy a Tobin tax on international transactions and international remittances, there's a possibility you could actually raise some substantial revenue, but it might only work in countries which are basically slightly more resource rich, like Egypt, for instance, or Algeria and the like. Okay. So the other trends that we seem to be seeing across the African continent in terms of the opportunities for scaling up other taxes, this is basically necessitated by a decline in income and corporate taxes. And the potential likely sources of revenue seem to be property tax, wealth tax, e-trade taxes, and remittance taxes. And what we've basically seen more recently is that, well, Africa has been struggling with e-trade for several years, but over the last year and a half, what we've seen is that the growth as a result of the lockdown is that the sector has grown fivefold in this particular year. So that presents another opportunity in terms of levying taxes. And the classic case in point would just basically be tech firms and Netflix that basically are being consumed a lot more, largely because people have not are locked in particular spaces and the like, or they basically have to order everything online. And this raises a pertinent question around, so how do you tax this particular initiative? Do you impose a global tax, or do you impose a local tax to try and resolve this? And these are some of the issues various tax administrators are basically considering. Speaking of property tax, what we seem to be seeing based on the work that I've done in Zambia is that there's a significant opportunity in terms of enhancing revenue collections. What we basically saw in terms of coverage is that there's very limited coverage. Roughly about 30% of the properties in Lusaka, in and around Lusaka, were basically on the valuation roll. And this is largely because of inadequacies in the systems in terms of capturing. They don't seem to have a real-time system to actually capture various transactions in terms of property transactions and relaying that information to the municipalities. And I think through the work that we were doing with the World Bank in this particular sector was trying to see how can we optimize revenue systems and GIS systems in such a way that you can basically capture entire populations, as well as ensure that you enhance revenue collection by enhancing compliance beyond the 40% that is available in Zambia. And this basically has a significant implication on the fiscus in the sense that is very closely tied to services and service provision, in the sense that the money that ordinarily would have come from a central government grant, which has actually ended up going to debt servicing, could actually be released locally through some sort of property tax, and that property tax could basically provide the basic services that are required in each municipality, and would reduce the pressure on the fiscus itself. So I guess in terms very broadly, what we're saying as well, just decentralizing the revenue collection for service provision. In addition to that, what we seem to be seeing are a number of challenges. So within the South African context, we see that within South Africa, which is slightly a bigger economy, there have been late social protection payments and employment payments. So I think there's a lag of about 3 months in terms of the payment of these social protection grants. And then also, in addition to that, only 30% of the 11.3 million people who have been given income support grants. So in short, there has been some provision of some concessional financing in form of income grants over and above the tax postponement for the small businesses and the large corporations as well. But still, despite all of that, and then we seem to be seeing that there's an influx of new businesses. So as people basically fall out of the formal working sector, they fall into the informal sector, and because of falling into that informal sector, they could either make some substantial gains in terms of, they now participate in the formal sector, in the economy formally, and make some revenue, or they don't, and then consequently they increase the number of informal people that need to basically be supported. So I think what needs to be done in that particular space is to invest in some sort of technology system or some valuation, some register of basically who's doing what. So in this case, technology could potentially play a role in terms of having a register, a real-time register of people both within the formal and the informal sector. And then also we seem to be seeing across the African continent is that there's a multiplicity of taxes, and people are fatigued in terms of, you know, the taxes that need to be paid. So there seems to be a doubling of whatever taxes are available or payable by people in the formal sector. And this is another thing that the tax authorities and tax administrations would need to grapple with during this COVID crisis. And then we also seem to see the other trend that we seem to be saying is this significant increase in e-commerce and the taxation of multinational enterprises, which seems to be quite problematic. And I think the additional pressure, what adds an additional layer of complexity to the African situation is the high unemployment rates, which basically entail that this puts a lot of pressure on governments to try and provide some sort of public works programs in such scenarios. And this basically just a summary of what the financing challenges are for the formal sector. And I think Africa basically has a financing challenge for its small and medium scale enterprise of about $330 billion. So, but with COVID and the increasing number of people in the informal sector, rough estimates basically seem to be in the region of about 600 billion thereabout. And then I think this should be my last slide. From a public policy research perspective, I think some of the things that we're grappling with as a result of, and the conversations that we're trying to have with tax administrators across the African continent is just to basically understand who basically should be providing social protection and who should pay for it and who should benefit from it. So should the informal sector benefit from social protection? And if so, you know, how should they be told to pay for it? And this also taking into consideration the people that have been contributing to both in employment insurance and paying their taxes and are not getting that social grant that basically is being offered in the South African context. That question basically is, you know, resonates very highly with them. And then also with regards to the provision of pure and impure public goods, the pertinent question is we need infrastructure going forward. And of course, considering the debt situation, it might affect the next decade and a half, or the next 5 years or the next 10 years. So the pertinent question going forward is, you know, how do tax authorities, you know, help raise the revenue that's basically required? And if so, you know, do we need to be considering more innovative ways of financing infrastructure and going forward? And then I think the last point is just simply around the global taxation. I think the OECD has put in place a framework in terms of taxing multinational enterprises, like Google, Netflix, and the likes of Amazon. But the pertinent question is, would this lead to tax erosion on the part of various African governments who basically have introduced a social media tax? So the question is, you know, these are some of the potential issues that various tax administrations on the African continent would need to grapple with seriously. So thank you very much for that, and I look forward to further engaging.
Thank you, Mundia. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Ezera, over to you. If you can keep it to 4 minutes, I mean, that would be fantastic. Can you hear me, Ezera?
Thank you very much. I think most of the issues that I wanted to touch on have been alluded to by Maimbo and the rest of the colleagues. So I'll just briefly touch on those issues they did not touch. With respect to the African Tax Administration Forum, we held a survey with our members on COVID-19 pandemic, tax administration and policy responses to the pandemic. And some of the issues that I'm going to highlight came from this survey that we held with tax administrations in Africa. So The first issue that I can highlight is we found out that a number of countries, quite several countries, they gave out those relief measures, but most of them did not take the relief measures, and most of them did not budget for them. So this is one observation that we got, that there is no tracking of these tax expenditures, because eventually the relief measures become the tax expenditure, and some of them were not even budgeted for, but they were just provided, and also they are not being tracked, which becomes a risk also for those tax administrations in future. The other point that of note was the COVID-19 pandemic had a very negative impact, especially to the informal sector, judging by the fact that most of the African countries have a huge informal sector. And when the lockdowns came, the informal sector were the most highly affected sectors of the economy. And so they also needed some kind of help from even the tax perspective. The other point of note was that we also carried a survey with our tax administrations regarding the revenue loss from the customs side. And we, from a sample of 18 countries that we used for the period February to April, they lost, these 18 countries, they lost about 500 million USD in revenue. And if we estimated for the whole year, it came up to 1.1 billion for 18 countries. And when we factored it for the whole of for the rest of Africa, it was even above 3 billion USD. So that's quite a huge loss from the customs perspective. And also besides that revenue loss from the customs perspective, we also noted an increase in illicit financial flows, and increase in smuggling activities, especially around cigarettes, because some of the countries, they also barred the sale of cigarettes, but this resulted in smuggling activities of these products. So that's one other observation we made for the African countries. And then I think because most of the issues that I had, Maimbo had alluded to them, so it doesn't make sense for me to repeat. I can only say we also noted that a number of countries did not have BCPs, or business continuity plans, in place. With those countries that had business continuity plans, they were not even implementing them. So that was the challenge that we also noted. And regarding risk management also, we saw that quite a number of countries were not alert or were not prepared in managing this risk. So those are some of the key challenges that we observed for African economies. So they made several measures, which Maimbo has alluded to. We noted extension of filing deadlines or tax deferrals. So many measures were to support the health system. I will not give the statistics, but we have published a paper which can be accessed on the ATAF website. Because of time, I will not go down to the nitty-gritties. There were also measures to support business, where we have, for the sample that we had of 23 countries, we had 53 tax relief measures that we're targeting at supporting business. So I will conclude with some of the recommendations that we provided in the publication that I alluded to. So we recommended that tax administration should now focus on revenue streams that are not fully explored. I think we heard Denis talking about the high net worth individuals, taxation of high net worth individuals and property taxes. So these were some of the recommendations that we said, these areas that have not been fully explored. So it's better for tax administrations to consider them also, because there's potential for more revenue from those areas. There is need to modernize the information and communication technology systems because we realize that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has emphasized the need for tax administration to rethink ICT systems for tax administrations. I think you heard Maimbo alluding to the fact that some tax administrations were not even prepared when government imposed lockdowns and employees were supposed to work from home. They were not prepared financially, they were not prepared in terms of the ICT infrastructure. So those are some of the issues that we identify.
Thank you.
The
sorry. Sorry for cutting you off. Please continue, please. I thought you finished.
Okay, I'm almost finishing. I'm only left with 2 points. So we noted also that the tax reliefs measures that were provided to tax by tax administrations, they did not have sunset clauses or caps on them. So they were just given without a cap or sunset clause. So we are recommending that tax administration should look into that, because this is a risk also in terms of revenue loss. And then because we noted challenges in the business continuity plans and risk management, one of the recommendations is that the tax administration should ensure that they implement this in order to minimize tax fraud. Lastly, we have noted that there was a huge loss in terms of customs revenue. So we recommend that tax administrations may need to undertake action to safeguard revenues, for instance, by intensifying post-clearance audits and putting in place systems to curb smuggling activities, as I've already alluded to the fact that there was a heavy smuggling, especially on some of the products like cigarettes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you. Julian, over to you, please.
Thank you, Christos, and everybody. I will try to be very fast and just put this out there. Happy to follow up with people individually if anyone is interested. Slightly different perspective. I have worked on behavioral tax compliance, but the project I want to briefly mention is with small and medium enterprises in Kenya, working with the World Bank and the government there. So it's more about the tax base and resilience, and actually a bit related to social protection, as Mundia brought up. We had already been organizing a project where the main intervention was small cash grants, smallish, $400 roughly, and some business skills services for these micro enterprises in Kenya. And that had just started. We had done the baseline survey in January and February of this year. And then of course the pandemic hit. So we were randomizing the cash to different groups. And so once the pandemic hit, we decided this is unfortunate for the world, but it's a great opportunity to learn about what's happening and what kinds of interventions could make a difference. So we added some additional survey rounds with a subset, about 2,000 total enterprises, so still a good number, from sort of March through October, November of this year in several rounds. And so not surprisingly, we're able to see that there's a large negative impact of COVID. I saw some interesting discussion in the chat on informality. I think we can look at that. I'll have to check. I'm not sure whether we have that, but something similar. We certainly see what happens to their businesses. Are businesses stopping? Are they hemorrhaging, funds, and what's going on? But then also we have this intervention, and so we see that there is resilience in the sense that there's mitigation from even this modest size cash amount. So many more businesses in the intervention group and the treatment group are likely to still be operational, to still be viable versus the control group. And profits and sales are better. It's not as big a difference there, but existence of the business and having that be the primary source of income for the household or for the individual is much more likely. So I see this as a positive thing, that maybe not surprising, you give people money, they're better off, but given the extent of the crisis, it wasn't obvious that the sort of modest support services, the cash, and we see also a positive impact, although smaller, from the business skills services, that those really do make a difference. It can help people to last through the crisis period until things come back. So again, we saw that as quite positive and having implications for whether it's government or international interventions to keep things moving. So I will stop there. Again, happy to follow up more with people or answer questions. Thanks again.
Thank you, Julian. I mean, thank you, everybody. I mean, for fascinating insights into the issues. There's I'm looking at the chat box, and unfortunately, as interesting as the discussion is, the time is running out. There's a particular question that I would like to each one of you to take a minute and respond, because we highlighted the negative aspects, but surely, I mean, there must be, and then Mundia alluded to that. Surely there must be some positives, or some positives coming out of that, possibly. Certainly in the developed world, I mean, there are some positives, especially tax administrations. I mean, they're doing things that they haven't done for years and years, but now it's the time. They're being forced, I mean, to do them. So I would like each one of you to take just 30 seconds, a minute, to respond to that. Does the panel see opportunities emerging from COVID-19?
Maybe I can
Please,
start.
Please, Maimbo, yes.
I think some of the opportunities that exist now are that the pandemic has made it possible for tax administration to rely more on use of electronic services, things like even in terms of payment, in terms of filing. So those are opportunities. And in my mind, if we are able, for example, most African countries now have moved more to mobile money. So that could be an opportunity for tax administration to be able to access better information on the transactions the people are having. And one thing about the development of mobile money in Africa is that each mobile platform is linked to identification details of individuals. So it's easier for tax administration to take that information and as part of third-party source of more transactional information. So I think ICT is the gold mine that is available now for tax administration.
Thank you. Denis, over to you. Opportunities emerging that otherwise we wouldn't have. Try again.
Okay, great. Still us. Yeah, thanks a lot. And I mean, I totally agree with Maimbo on the opportunities, because as a tax administration, I'll tell you that we've already headed that journey of investing into trying to integrate with all these mobile companies, regulators, to try and tap into that that opportunity that has laid itself just because of COVID. There's also one thing that I also wanted to add on to the opportunities that are coming through is the aspect of there are these things that have been always going on the back page when it comes to policy interventions and analysis. When we talk of, because now most of the transactions have gone online, it is now paramount that we put more effort on trying to see how do we tackle the e-commerce challenges and what they that they present to us. For me, I think this is an opportunity to now have direct, deliberate approaches to try and tackle or engage into these policies targeting e-tax transactions. Then maybe finally, of course, we've always had, this is now an opportunity to develop as a tax administration, our capacity to analyze data. Data analytics has now gone to the forefront. There's one thing having all these access to the information, but what do you do with this information to make the right interventions? So I'll just leave it for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis. Mundia, over to you.
So thank you very much, Christos.
1 minute. 1 minute, please.
Okay, now it's just going to be very radical and say, well, this presents a phenomenal opportunity for tax administrations to actually tap into the informal sector and to bring it on stream through the use of ICTs. And then, of course, the other point is just simply to say, well, it provides a remarkable opportunity to rethink international transactions and between multinational organizations. And also perhaps it also provides a useful platform to basically integrate the banking platforms as well, to basically monitor in transactions and make sure that you resolve the challenges around capital flight and the like. Thank you.
Thank you. Ezera, over to you. 1 minute, please. Ezera, can you hear me? Yeah. You are muted. You have 30 seconds now.
Okay, sorry. I think the host is not giving me a right to unmute. So now I have it. Thank you. I wanted to say, with regard to tax administrations in Africa, one thing that I had not maybe highlighted because of time was that in terms of revenue opportunities, we realized that most of the revenue is now coming from the telecom and ICT industry, as opposed to the tourism, which was heavily hit. So some of the opportunities that are presented by the COVID-19 pandemic, one, tax administrations have to now rethink their ICT system. And as part of ATAF, we're also moving with project where we are assisting or coming up with a guidebook that will assist tax administrations in Africa to rethink the ICT system. You see also there's an opportunity in that since we are now going into more ICT, that means maybe there's gonna be not a great need of tax administration staff, which will mean that some of the tax administrations will need indeed cut costs. So those are some of the opportunities that have been presented, beside the fact that has been alluded to also of the by Mundia of the informal sector, the opportunity to tap revenue from the informal sector through the ICT system. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Julian, over to you.
Sorry, I did take a moment with the host. I just, along similar lines to what people have been saying, I see the opportunity of speeding things up that were happening anyway, that have been sort of forced and made salient now. So digitization, as has been discussed already, I would add maybe for these small businesses we're working with, that so efficiency, upskilling if that's necessary, really thinking about what's the core business, even thinking a little bit about the future. On the one hand, survival for right now, but what's it going to take? Rather than just thinking through month to month, doing what's been done before, you're saying, well, where do you see this? What will it look like in the new world a year from now? And then just very briefly, on the same note, we have a strong gender component to our project, really trying to look at both male and female in businesses. And again, I see that as that's going to happen anyway in the future. There's going to be more and more, but making that conscious, making that salient, both for the businesses, for the customers, for the governments, and other entities involved. So I think just speeding things up, that we're going in a good direction anyway, can be a positive outcome.
Thank you very much, all of you. There's quite a lot of discussion going through the chat box. Please have a look at that. Unfortunately, time has run out. As exciting as the discussion is, we have to wrap up here. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been a privilege, speaking to you and listening to your views. And I certainly hope that we can do that again, with more time in the near future. Thank you very much. I appreciate coming with you. But before you go, can I ask you to turn on your camera so that we take a photo?
So there's 2 papers coming up in the next session. Since we're running a little late, we'll move straight in. So hopefully we can get Antoine Genest Gregoire. I think he just needs to be made a co-host, and then we'll be hearing from Antoine.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Antoine. Thank you.
I think you also have to allow me to share my screen.
Yep, so Christos, as the host, can you give Antoine the right study needs?
Yeah, I'm doing that. You should be okay now.
Okay, John, you're showing up as a co-host. Yep, and I can see your slides now on the screen.
Perfect. So I can start right away?
Yep, go for it, yep.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Antoine Genin-Grégoire. I'm from Carleton University, that would be in Ottawa, Canada. So today I'm gonna present ongoing research. It's research I started before the beginning of my PhD at Carleton University. Back then I used to work at Université Sherbrooke, which is another Canadian university. And so that is work I did jointly with Professors Luc Godbout and Jean-Herman Guy. My work is supported by both of those universities, as well as the public funding agencies of Canada and the province of Quebec. So essentially, the objective of the work, the larger context of the work I'm doing is the idea that we hear a lot about international tax issues, about how perhaps Google and Facebook are not paying their fair share of taxes, how people are shuffling their money around to tax havens. And one of the things we have in mind is that that kind of talk is probably leading to the erosion of trust in the tax systems in national countries for most taxpayers, for whom obviously shifting their money around boundaries is not borders is not really an opportunity. As probably other presenters have pointed out, tax evasion is kind of a hard thing to study. It's hard to define. There's an ongoing debate about what specific acts constitute either evasion or avoidance or simply clever tax planning. On top of that, it's pretty hard to measure. So if you're looking at the things that people know and people agree is illegal, well, obviously people are not going to be very forthright about telling you about it. We do have measures of tax evasion that rely on macroeconomic estimates. So, for instance, these are the estimates that usually is called estimates of the tax gap. So they tell us usually as a share of GDP or as a share of a tax base, how much money we're losing. We don't know exactly how we're losing it, but that gives us kind of an idea of how much we're losing. And we also have the micro measures of tax evasion, which are usually experiments. So you're going to have people play games where they earn money. That's usually the reward they would get from participating in your experiment that you modify according to the way they work. And then you have kind of a pseudo tax function as part of your experiment, where you give people different opportunity for avoidance or evasion, and you see what predicts people avoiding or evading the taxes as part of your setup. Obviously, one of the limits of those things is that it's an experimental setup, so people don't necessarily behave the same way they would in reality. The other type of study that you get on tax evasion at a micro level are opinion surveys, where you're going to ask people how in agreement they are with tax evasion or not paying a fair share of tax. So those mostly measure attitudes toward tax evasion. Our research is a micro measure where we try to go somewhere between those two types of micro studies of tax evasion. So we run an experiment, but it's an experiment embedded as part of a survey. The reason we chose to go in that route is that those surveys of attitudes towards tax evasion are super interesting to understand why people evade taxes. That's the behavioral part of it. The problem is they don't have an outcome. So we can link whether, for instance, more religious people have more tolerant of tax evasion or not. We can link different components of individuals with their attitudes about tax evasion, but we can't link those different characteristics to actual tax evasion. So that's why we try to embed an experiment that gets at a measure of actual evasion in a survey where we can also ask people about their attitudes about other stuff and try to build models. Try to build a model of why do people evade taxes, or most realistically, why don't more people evade taxes considering the very low levels of enforcement that we generally have. So that experiment was implemented as part of a survey run by Firm Léger, which is a Canadian firm. We had a bit more than 3,000 respondents all across Canada, except the territories. That's a response rate of 16% approximately. And we use what are called indirect questioning methods. So these are methods that were developed mostly in political science, and they're used essentially to ask questions about subject about which you expect people will not give you a forthright answer. So a classical example of that were studies about support for gay marriage. And researchers had the idea that there's open support for gay marriage, but there might be overt support for gay marriage that's actually lower than what is reported. That's been used for electoral turnout. It's been used for support for a Black president in the United States. It's been used for all kinds of questions for which you expect people will not tell you their real opinion. And it can go in either direction. People might say something more positive than what they think, or they might say something more negative than what they actually think. The most common of those methods is called the list experiment, and that's what we used. So essentially, the way a list experiment works is that you split your sample into a control group and a test group, as in most experiments. And rather than ask people a controversial item about tax evasion, in our case, you give them a list of items. And rather than asking them if they agree or if those items apply to them, you ask them how many of those items apply to them. And the experimental part comes from the fact that in the control group, people see only 4 items, about which obviously we don't really care. And people in the test group see the same 4 control items, but plus a 5th one, which is the item that actually interests us. If the randomization is done correctly, the level of agreement with the 4 main items should be exactly the same in both groups. So when you run the average of the number of items with which people agree between the 2 groups, the difference can only be explained by the fact that people in the test group saw an additional 5th item. So the difference in the mean number of items to which individuals agree in both groups gives you directly an estimate of the prevalence of your item of interest, in our case, tax evasion. Of course, you're always susceptible to errors in your survey, and beyond that, you don't know in advance if that subject is really as sensitive as you believe it is. So on top of asking the list experiment, we also asked a direct question on tax evasion at the end of our survey to see if people actually reveal more under the indirect questioning method than they would reveal under a direct question, which does not protect their privacy. Beyond that, since it's a method that's been used for a long time, there are a few best practices about it. One of them is actually included a very common item and a very uncommon item as part of your list. That serves to raise the odds, well, actually diminish the odds of people answering that they agree with 0 items, in which case their privacy is not protected, or people agreeing with all 4 or all 5 items, which also reduces their privacy. So having a common item creates a floor. Most people will agree with that very common item. Having a very uncommon item creates a ceiling where most people will not agree with that item. The other idea is to use both a left-wing and a right-wing oriented political statement. Theoretically, those could be different, but the idea is that you want to include 2 items for which most people will agree, but with only one of them. So that also raises privacy, because most people will be in agreement with one of those items, but I can't, because it's a list, I only know the number, I can't know which one of them. So that also raises the privacy and diminishes the odds of people answering 0. So that's the general setup of a list experiment. We ran 2 parallel list experiments as part of our survey. The first one was this one. So you can see again the left wing, right wing items, and also very common items. I would like Canadian taxes to be made simpler. Everyone is for apple pie. And I ran for elections, which is something a very small minority of people do. And the controversial item we used in that case was to avoid paying sales tax. I have paid for a purchase in cash in the last year. So that would be a very common form of tax evasion. It's also, as I mentioned, there are definitional debates about tax evasion. This one is very straightforward. There's no ambiguity that paying in cash to avoid taxes is illegal. And as I mentioned, that was a list experiment. And at the end of the experiment, we also ran the direct question. So does this apply to you to avoid paying sales tax? You have paid in cash in the last year, yes or no? Second list experiment we ran was same principle. We changed the items a bit, of course, so people wouldn't find our survey weird. And the controversial item in that case is, in the past, I have provided incomplete or misleading information on my tax return to pay less taxes. Again, we went with something that's simple, and that's pretty much unambiguously illegal form of tax evasion. So it's incomplete or misleading. So there's intent in there, and there's dissimulation in there, and there's also I did it to pay less taxes. So we're trying to avoid cases where people would have provided incomplete information by error. The fact that they did it to pay less taxes kind of protects us against this. And of course, again, we asked the direct question at the end of the survey. So I don't think I included that slide, but essentially running 2 list experiments with randomization created like 8 branches in our survey. So we have people who were control, people who were test control, people who were control test, people who were control, and because the order of the 2 lists was inverted, that creates 8 different groups of people who either answered 1, 2, or 0 of those lists, but all people saw the direct question at the end of the survey. So the way you calculate the result, as I mentioned, it's fairly straightforward. You calculate the number of items to which people agree in the control group. You can calculate the number of items to which people agree in the test group, and the difference between the 2 directly gives you your estimation of the prevalence of the trait you're interested in. So sorry, I'm hiding my own numbers. That's confusing. So for consumption taxes, you can see that 28% of our respondents, when using the list experiment, confided to pay in cash to avoid those taxes in the last year. When we asked them the question directly, that was only 26% of them that agreed, told us that they did so in the last year. So not a very big gap. When we asked the question for income tax evasion, you can see that 13% of our respondents did tax evasion the way we described it in their whole life. So the time frame is not exactly the same. But when we asked them the question directly, it's only 5.6% of them that were willing to tell us about it. So that's the big difference, and that was kind of what we expected. It's fairly easy if you, at least in Canada, if you ask around you to find someone who paid in cash for something. It's fairly common for renovations. So that's something that's fairly common in the construction industry. So it's something that's fairly common. I don't know of people who have misled on their tax return. That's not something that's as usual. So as we expected, that would be something that's more private, and that the gap between those 2 numbers would be larger, which is what we find. It's more than double between those two estimates. Obviously, the objective, as I mentioned, is to go beyond those numbers and link those numbers to the characteristics of our respondents and try to understand something about tax evasion. Just before I move to that, a few benchmark. Obviously, it's very difficult to benchmark benchmark studies of tax evasion because everyone is grasping at straws to get an estimate. The closest thing we found was a study by Cleveland and colleagues that used random audits from the Danish tax authority, and they found that 10.7% of Danish taxpayers misled or did a form of tax evasion that's very similar to ours. So that's fairly close to our 13%. So that seems like a convincing, it's a good sign. The Canadian Revenue Agency also runs a survey asking people whether they would be likely or very likely to evade taxes following essentially the same definitions as we have. So 5% of them would be likely or very likely to evade income taxes, and 34% likely or very likely to evade consumption taxes. So that's similar to our estimates, but the 5% is much closer to our direct estimate, while the 34% is much higher. And there's also been research done in Colombia by Ferguson and his colleagues that actually ran a list experiment as part of a project on trust and social cohesion in general, but that used a list experiment to see how many people evaded the Colombian GST, so the consumption tax that they have, and the result gave them 19%, which is a lot lower than what we get, and that's fairly surprising considering Colombia has a much larger, well, likely a much larger on-the-ground economy than Canada. So these are puzzling results as of right now. So the links to motivation, we're trying to we try to embed a version of what's called the slippery slope model, which is a model of tax compliance, a psychology influenced model of tax compliance. So essentially, the idea is that tax compliance comes from through two streams: either a voluntary compliance streams that comes from attitudes of confidence in the tax authority, and also a belief that the tax authority is mostly effective at punishing, at catching those who cheat, so that furthers confidence, and then voluntary compliance. And the other channel is coercion. Coercion, that's actually the French version. Coercion, where the idea is that the tax authority is vengeful. The tax authority wants to catch you if you cheat, and again, combined with the fact that they're pretty effective, that's going to push you to be compliant because you don't want to get caught. So this one might be a bit closer to traditional economic view of tax evasion, where it's more of a gamble against being audited. So our survey included scales to measure all 5 of those concepts. We also included tax knowledge, which is a subject of interest for my colleagues and I. We've been working on that for 4 years. And most description of the slippery slope models kind of consider that tax knowledge might play a role, but it's never been implemented yet. It's not obvious where it goes. It could go both ways. It could make people more knowledgeable, so more acute tax evaders, or it could make them give them more confidence in the system in general and make them less prone to evasion. We also included the perceptions of fairness. There's perceptions about tax authority, but there's also perception about what's done with the money, and fairness plays in that. So it's not only that tax authorities catch the cheats, but it's that people at different parts of the income distribution pay their fair share, and also the idea that the money collected this way is used in a fair way. So these are the first part is mostly finished, but that part is more preliminary. So that's why I'm presenting it here. I'm hoping for helpful comments from you. Generally, we don't find results that conform to the idea that there's an enforced compliance channel. So what you see on the left is that people who are more volunteer compliant mentality evade taxes in much lower numbers, but you don't see the same with enforced compliance. People who have an enforced compliant mentality actually evade taxes more, which is why it swings on the right. Knowledge seems to have a fairly small effect, and it's a positive effect. So that would be people who know more evade more. Perceptions of justice also swing in a very strange way. Trust seems to have almost no effect. effectiveness as what's planned in the model, it pushes people to evade taxes less, though in a relatively modest way. And coercion, though probably in coherence with the fact that enforced compliance doesn't seem to work, it actually has a positive effect on the odds of evading consumption tax. And if you look at income tax, the effects are mostly the same, except mechanically they're smaller because there are a lot less income tax evaders in our sample. The main difference you can see is justice now makes a lot more sense in the direction it goes. You got to keep in mind that our questions about justice are mostly implicitly about income tax evasion. The distribution of the tax burden as far as consumption taxes go is not very straightforward, but it's fairly obvious for income tax, which is designed for fairness. And in that case, knowledge also has a much larger impact. That also makes sense because our index of tax knowledge is essentially income tax focused. And I can expand on that later if that's something that interests you. So that's mostly where we are right now. We have results that don't fit super obviously with at least one of the tracks of the slippery slope model. That's also a model that's been refined over time. There have been new additions to it recently, which I still haven't had the opportunity to integrate to see if they how well they play with our results. But that's mostly where we're at. I guess the main contribution, and that's really what I want to leave you with, is that they're using that kind of experiment, and I'm hoping people do the same with larger samples and different countries. That really gives us an outcome measure, and an outcome measure is really what we need to refine all of those motivational models about why people do tax evasion, because we will never be able to do it from macro data, and we will never be able to get at the root of it with only attitudinal cross comparative data. So that's it. That's it for my paper. And I hope that was interesting to you. And if you have any questions or comments that you don't have the time to give me today, I've given you ways to contact me on this last slide.
Thank you, Antoine. We do still have some time for questions. So get your thinking caps on. If you have something that comes to mind, please type it away in the chat box, and I will get it to Antoine. While people are musing on this, Antoine, maybe I will kick off with a question, if that's all right. Could you tell me a little bit more about the participants in the experiment and survey? Exactly what population were you dealing with? You may have said that, I may have missed it.
It's in the paper. It's not. I didn't cover it a lot in the talk. So Léger is a big survey firm. So they have what's called a web panel. So they recruit people by phone and by social media and by a few contests. And they have something like 400,000 Canadians in their panel, and that's the panel they use for all of their research. So mostly marketing research, but also voting intentions. And we asked them for a Canadian representative panel. So essentially, we have people in all strata of income, age, in all of the provinces, as I mentioned. And it's the experiment, the randomization was done in each group. So we have a very strong idea that the distribution is even in all control and test groups in all versions. But of course, because it's a survey, there are some groups that are captured a bit less. So they provide us with weights, with survey weights that allow us to compensate. Those weights are calibrated to the Canadian census. So it's a general population survey, and then it's calibrated with weights to be representative of the whole adult Canadian population.
Right. Thank you. So I haven't come across the list design before. It's something that's novel to me. Did I understand you correctly that the reason that the list helps is that the participants, they don't have to say which statements they are agreeing with? Is that the essence of it? They just say that they agree with a certain number of statements, but they don't have to identify the statements that they agree with. Is that the essence of of the methodology?
Yeah, exactly. The heart of it is that I can't get an estimate of the share of them that agree with something, in that case, tax evasion, but I can't know specifically which ones. So I'm getting the information I want as a researcher, and they're getting to keep their information private. For the most case, as I mentioned, the people who agree with everything kind of reveal themselves, and people who agree with nothing also reveal themselves. But for the vast majority of respondents, their privacy is always protected. I don't know who they are, but I don't even know who they are as part of my sample. I only know their odds of tax evasion. So all of those estimates that you see at the end for compliance attitudes, we have the same for gender or age. They're probability densities, but I don't know specifically which individuals have done evasion or not as part of my sample. So that's why it's called an indirect question method. And also, it's that's why I hope people take it up, because those are to provide good estimates, you have to have very large sample sizes. You need much larger sample sizes than in regular surveys because of the noise you yourself create to protect the privacy of individuals. So I'm hoping researchers with more means than us can do that with larger samples, and they're probably going to get they're probably going to be able to test more complex relationships than the ones we were able to test in our sample.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Don't think we've got any other questions on the chat that I'm seeing, so I might venture to ask you one more since I'm being given the floor. So you mentioned at the end something about voluntary compliance being, and that was one of your kind of attitudinal positions, whereas I would have seen that as an outcome variable rather than an attitude. I just wanted to clarify. So that you would say means somebody that is attitudinally inclined to pay taxes even if there's no threat of being caught and so on. Is that what you would mean by that?
Again, I'm not the one who formulated the framework, but the general idea is that it derives from psychology, and it's the difference between internal and external motivation. So people who are externally motivated do something because they feel there are constraints on them from the outside, and those can be positive or negative, but they come from the outside. And people who are internally motivated will do something because they feel it converges with their conception of themselves. So the scale we use for voluntary compliance will include items, for instance, saying I comply with taxes because that is the right thing to do. So that's not something about others. It's something about it fits with my values. So that's why I do it. And on the opposite, the enforced compliance literature will explicitly say I comply with taxes because I fear I'm gonna get caught if I don't. So that's really the way it is. It's still an attitude because I don't know if they actually comply with taxes out of those statements, but I'm getting at why they do it. So there are a series of statements like that denote the differences between the two. But of course, it's an intermediary concept. The first one would be do people trust the tax authority? Do people find tax authorities to be fair, to be efficient? And then that should change the motivational posture of individuals, which then, and that's what we test, would impact their actual actions. If the motivational models work, you should see their impact on actions.
Okay. Thank you, Antoine. Okay, I think we shall move on to our next speaker. And this is Agung Darono. I hope I've got that right. So Agung, please share your slides with us. Okay, I can't yet hear you, but I can see you. Okay, so I still can't hear you. I think you may be muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes, wonderful.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. I'm sorry for the inconvenience.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see all of you in this conference. Greeting from Jakarta. It's already midnight here, and usually we are watching EPL match at this time, but today I have to keep awake and get dressed, sit upright, and deliver a presentation while my wife and my kids are sleeping in the next room. Yeah, what a day! So I'm Ali Pratama from Ministry of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Today I'm here with my colleague, Mr. Darono. I believe he is with us now, who are working for Ministry of Finance as well. And currently we are working at one of division in Ministry of Finance of Indonesia that is responsible for human resource development, particularly for tax officers. So we have quite a close relationship with Directorate General of Tax as Indonesian Tax Authority. And today we are going to present our paper entitled Institutional Logics in Tax Analytics, Evidence from Indonesia. This paper is written based on our experience as trainer, lecturer, and tax officer training partner, particularly in data analytics field. Uh, Before I proceed, let me state the disclaimer that the views and the findings expressed in this paper are those of ours as authors and do not represent the institution with which uh, we are affiliated. I would like to start the presentation by giving you a brief picture of Indonesian tax administration system. Indonesian tax administration system uses self-assessment for personal and corporate income tax and for VAT as well, and official assessment system for land and building tax, and also withholding system for other types of income tax. And based on the tax administrator, we have several taxes which are managed by central government. And we also have the local taxes which are imposed based on local government regulations. You can see the tax revenue realization for the last 6 years in the graph. The tax revenue makes up more than 80% of total state revenue with tax ratio around 10% in 2019. So our research focuses on the taxes that are managed by central government. Okay. As I described earlier, the tax administration system in Indonesia, particularly that is managed by central government, embraces self-assessment system where taxpayers are authorized to calculate and pay their taxes without having to wait any tax assessment from the tax officers. One main feature that should be exist in any country using self-assessment system is tax audit and supervision, where tax officers are authorized to conduct tax audit and tax supervision in order to assess whether taxpayers comply with tax regulation or not, and to determine further supervisory actions. Uh, One main challenge faced by tax authority is how to allocate their resources effective and efficiently in conducting the audits. And nowadays, most business in the world are transforming digitally, and this transformation causes big data exposure on any business related to uh, related to tax, yeah, including tax authorities. That's why the issue of the tax data analytics emerges. So in general, tax analytics is a framework of knowledge and practice to get insight from tax-related data to support tax administration and policy. The implementation of tax data analytics can be found in risk-based audit, fraud investigation, dispute settlement, and assessing the effectiveness of tax policies. And Directorate General of Tax, as Indonesian Tax Authority, has implemented data analytics by using comprehensive data management tools as part of the current tax administration system. And in its 2016 annual report, DGT stated that social business, mobile computing, cloud computing, and big data analysis are its information communication technology development pillars to support its primary tax administration functions. Subsequently, DGT also established a new unit that is responsible to manage data and information that is separated from information technology management function. These changes and developments related to the organization and tax data management aspects need to get more in-depth analysis using a socio-organizational perspective, especially by using institutional logic analysis framework. So our research question would be how tax authority adjusts its various socio-organizational aspects to implement data analytics as part of the tax administration. Actually, the discussion of tax data analytics is not an entirely new thing, and tax administration is one of the fields that intensively implementing data analytics as a part of its function. In its publication in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, OECD proposed the term of advanced analytics to represent predictive and prescriptive data analytics used in tax administration field. OECD stated that predictive analytics is an effort to find the relationship between tax-sensitive data for anticipatory purposes. Meanwhile, prescriptive analysis is an attempt to identify causality that can be implied from various tax data that have been collected. OECD suggestion confirms that what has been concluded by Stankovic and Leonas in 2015 that the exercise of advanced analytics like anomaly detection, predictive modeling, and social network analysis will help tax authorities in detecting any taxpayers' non-compliance symptoms. Moreover, predictive analytics application helps tax authorities to accurately select taxpayers to be audited by applying data analytics techniques like pattern recognition, outlier detection, cluster analysis, experimental design, network analysis, and text mining. In conclusion, the implementation of data analytics for tax administration purposes can be found in risk-based audit selection, tax payment reporting, tax receivable management, and tax services delivery, and even policy evaluation. As I described above, that we are discussing the tax data analytics from institutional logic perspective to understand how individual and organization behave to a social context and mechanisms. In practice, institutional logics that existed in an organization or field are not necessarily single. In some circumstances, some institutional logics may be engaged and brought by the same actor, and it's often referred to as competing logics. And these competing logics intertwine and interplay each other. However, however, the study shows that in a social organization in the UK, competing logics are not constantly contested. Instead, they can be aligned and merged in the form of organizational hybridity. Sorry, have problem. Okay. So, one perfect example of the competing logics can be found in research conducted by Ken Hillel in 2016, where they found that how universities articulate the logic or corporatism as proposed by new public management and the logic of scientific academic. And other perfect example of competing logics in text consultation field is what Apostle and Pop did in 2016 in Romania. They explained that tax consulting practices in Romania face the challenge of how to articulate the logics between uh, tax consulting as part of business activities, where they have to accommodate all their client needs, including tax evasion effort and tax consulting as ethically standard professional services. So, in short, the analysis of institutional logic references the option of attitude or action of organization actors, and at the same time, this logic also depicts the relationship between the actors and their organization field. And this research uses institutional logic's conceptual framework because it can show in detail many socio-organizational aspects, including the role of actors, and it related to the implementation of data analytics in the tax administration field. So for the research objective, we expect to provide a framework to understand how institutional logics work so that any organization can implement data analytics as their strategic initiative. Uh, we would like to present an institutional logic conceptual framework with a real case on how data analytics is used in tax administration field. And for the research approach, we use a qualitative interpretive approach to obtain a comprehensive understanding of the interplay between the collective cognition of organization actors and their actions related to the implementation of tax data analytics. And we also use the interpretive approach with case study to be able to conduct in-depth exploration of programs, events, activities, individual or group processes using the emic perspective. And for data collection, we conducted documentation study and interviews where we collect and analyze documents, including legal provisions, official reports, standards, application system manuals published in various formats and media. And we also analyze recording of the data analytics related trainings organized by our organization. And interview were conducted with the trainer of the training program who are tax authorities employees as well. And for data collection, processing, and analysis, we are using the interactive data analysis, where we modified the framework by inserting an institutional logic conceptual framework to collect, reduce, and visualize and analyze data to draw conclusion and answer the problems. And for interpretation purposes, we conducted thematic analysis, where we examine and present the data by identifying pattern and relationships between data, selecting terms, and related to the research objectives. Okay. Uh, Let me move on to the finding and the discussion session. One of the DGT's ICT strategic objective is to improve the availability of qualified data and information. And this objective is stated in the DGT ICT blueprint. Uh, and the blueprint emphasized big data analytics as one of ICT development pillars and strategic application system for Indonesia tax administration. And the implementation of big data analytics will be done gradually as mandated in the analytics platform development plan, as you can see in the picture, where the planning and review phase started in 2016, and it includes the preparation of business processes uh, for data mining application. The application is expected to have the ability to perform analysis on taxation data to identify the pattern and the possibility of tax evasion and tax avoidance. And during 2017 and 2019, the implementation phase is started. The data mining related application will be put into use in this phase to map specific pattern in taxation data. So, as we conclude, the implementation of data analytics in DGT includes to trace the improper crediting of VAT invoices using data matching technique, and also perform network analysis for VAT fraud detection, and social network analysis to to spot any unusual transaction uh, using specific data. Okay. This is the illustration of data governance in DGT after the establishment of the new directorate that specifically has the responsibility to manage all the data flow in DGT. Each data source that enters the DGT data governance architecture, both internal and external, will first undergo data profiling and data validation before being utilized. Structured data that come from both internal and external parties will process through the OLTP system that you can see on the left side. Yeah. And the next process is the data extraction, transformation, and loading, or ETL process, to an enterprise data warehouse, or EDW. Enterprise data warehouse is actually a structured, integrated, and subject-oriented data repository, and it has dimension and time that can be used for online analytical processing, or OLAP, and for decision-making purposes. On the other hand, the unstructured and semi-structured data will be accumulated in a data lake, yeah, just like the structured data. This type of data will also undergo the ETL procedures and be stored in enterprise data warehouse in the next process. But in certain circumstances, the unstructured or semi-structured data can be directly used for analytical or reporting purposes through the extract, load, and transform or ELT procedure without having to be stored in enterprise data warehouse first. Next, the enterprise data warehouse will be used for many things. Yeah, the three major interests of the enterprise data warehouse usage is as the input of the core text administration system atau core text or core text system. Enterprise data warehouse also used as an analytical tool to assess taxpayers' risk profile and to reporting and dashboarding purposes. And the result of data processing in enterprise data warehouse also used for other subsystems. For example, the audit subsystem can use the data that's stored in enterprise data warehouse to generate taxpayer profiles or other comparative data that is relevant to the audit process. Another example, the tax collection subsystem can also use the data stored in enterprise data warehouse to perform asset tracing for tax collection procedure or purposes. And for the finding and discussion, our research found that there are two competing logics that interplay in implementation of tax data analytics in Indonesia context. The first one is the tax compliant logic, and the second one is data government logics. Currently, these two logics are adopted from the tax administration field that is aggressively implementing data analytics as part of its business process. The adoption of the two logics strengthen the legitimacy of the tax supervision function in Directorate General of Tax to remain objective and based on the data. So it can minimize the arbitrary action by tax officers and also resistance from taxpayers. And from the tax compliance logic perspective, tax data analytics is an institution that enables organizational actors to prove allegation of taxpayer non-compliance, and then tax authorities can re-establish the amount of tax out and other legal measures. On the other hand, the extensive use of information in tax analytics creates exposure for the use of data. Uh, the exposure then triggers the operation of data government logics in the data management function, which conservatively the same data to the users. And currently, the Director General of Tax has implemented a taxpayer supervision system by utilizing information technology to analyze taxpayer compliance. And this monitoring system applies data analytics workflows starting from data collection, yeah, data analysis, and data visualization and reporting to present useful information for decision-making purposes. And the implementation of the system is to ensure that the supervisory activities are conducted effectively, efficiently, and comprehensively. And this compliance monitoring system serves not only to improve taxpayer compliance, but also as an early warning system to detect any non-compliance behavior. And based on the interview that we conducted, we conclude that the implementation of tax data analytics in Directorate General of Tax includes, like I said before, to trace the improper crediting of VAT invoice and to detect VAT fraud detection and to use social network analysis to spot any unusual transaction using distribution, share ownership, and family relation networks.
Okay, Aldi, I'll just butt in if I may. Apologies for interrupting you, but
okay.
I do want to leave just a couple of minutes for questions if there are any. You've taken up a little bit more than your slot already.
Okay, thank you, sir.
So I've allowed you to eat into your question time a little.
Okay.
But I would like to offer this opportunity just in case there are any questions out there. So if you have a question for Aldi, please put it in the chat, and
okay. I'm sorry.
I'll attempt to pass it on to Aldi.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katja. So yes, if you are just joining us, we're running a little late, but Jim Alm is up right after this.